Good evening. Welcome to the Livonia Public Schools Board of Education special meeting of February 21st, 2022. Mrs. Bonifield, would you please take the roll?
Mrs. Acosta?
Here.
Mrs. Bonifield is here. Mr. Centers?
Here.
Mrs. Jarvis?
Here.
Mr. Johnson?
Here.
Mrs. Bradford let us know she wasn't going to be able to make it tonight, and President Burton.
Here. And we have a quorum. Next item on our agenda actually, let me back up just a moment. The meeting this evening is rather brief. It is for the purpose of approving a few things for our bond that we need to get on order right away. As everyone is aware, supply chain is a serious issue, and we're trying to get a jump on that. So we do have just a few quick items to approve, so those items can be ordered. These items were all discussed at a previous study session and committee of the whole, so there will not be the length of discussion that you would normally expect on such items. Please understand that it is not because we have not discussed them at length, but rather that we have discussed them at least 2 other meetings. If you're looking for the discussion on those, you can always go to our website, livoniapublicschools.org. If you hover over the board tab and drop down to board information, you can look at the videos of previous meetings, and the previous meeting right before tonight's, which I believe was February 14th, would have discussion on these items upon which we're going to vote tonight. Let's see here. If you're looking for an agenda, you'd like to follow along at home. I see no one else in our audience this evening, but if you'd like to follow along at home, you can also find those agendas at the same board tab. Again, livoniapublicschools.org, hover over the board tab and go to board information, and you can follow along with our agenda this evening. The next item on our agenda is item 2, audience communications. I don't see anybody present in our room who looks like they may want to participate in audience communications. Seeing none, we will go to the next item on our agenda, which is item 3. Item 3 is approval of summer 2022 bond renovation bid package 2021 bond. And may I have a motion on that, please?
President Burton.
Mr. Johnson.
Move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District approve the recommendation from its owner's representative, Plant Moran Cressa, and its construction manager, Clark Construction Company, to approve the contractors identified in the construction project budgets for bid package number 2, project number 1, 2022 renovations and air conditioning upgrades at Coolidge Elementary, Grant Elementary, Hayes Elementary, Hoover Elementary, Kennedy Elementary, Randolph Elementary, Cooper Upper Elementary, Johnson Upper Elementary, Riley Upper Elementary, Emerson Middle, Holmes Middle, and Churchill High Schools in the total amount of $25,860,631, which includes costs for hard construction, fees, and contingency, and authorize the superintendent or her designee to negotiate and execute final contracts on behalf of the Board of Education with the awarded contractors.
Support.
We have a motion by Mr. Johnson, supported by Mrs. Bonifield. I'd like to make it known to my board members and the public that I will be abstaining from this vote. Members of my family own a company that has bid to some of the contractors that are listed on that document, and therefore I will be abstaining from any discussion or vote on this item. Mr. Francis, I believe you're going to be addressing the board on this.
Thank you, President Burton. As discussed at the Committee of the Whole last week, we have gone through at that time in detail with owner's representative Plant Moran Cressa all of the recommendations for the 2022 bond. We do have a couple of items that the board will see in the month of March that were either a rebid or didn't get enough, so we'll be having them out again. However, for the items in front of you, the vast majority of the scope is represented here amongst these buildings and amongst the vendors that have been recommended by Clark Construction and Plant Moran Cressa. These are folks that have been well vetted, as we discussed last week, both pre and post bid, and we do recommend them, either LPS, Plant Moran Cressa, and/or Clark Construction has worked at some point with all of these vendors and in one way, shape, or form, and we have been successful with the projects they've worked on. Just to clarify for the folks at home, a breakdown of the summer full renovation versus plus air conditioning updates versus air conditioning only in some buildings. I'm just going to read that list if you don't mind for the folks who are tuning in. I think that'll help clarify so there isn't any confusion. So we have 5 schools that are going to have the full renovation, meaning LMC, kitchens, some toilet rooms, doors, et cetera, all that scope that we have discussed in the past, as well as the air conditioning installation / upgrade at that building. So these 5 buildings are Coolidge, Kennedy, Randolph, Cooper, and Emerson. So we're going to go into those buildings this summer and do both construction as well as air conditioning. The following buildings that I'm about to read are air conditioning only that's coming in this package. And these are Grant, Hayes, Hoover, Johnson, Riley, Holmes, and Churchill. Those are AC only. And just for your clarification, we have mentioned that we do not expect the air conditioning to be up and running when folks get back in the start of the 2022-23 school year. We had a meeting last week. There's some electrical items that are lagging with regard to, as we've talked about, some of the concerns we've had with chain issues. So we definitely understand that, and we want folks at home and anybody working in those buildings whose children go to those buildings to understand that the AC should not be expected 100% complete and running when they return. We do recommend the board award contract with these vendors.
Thank you. Are there comments or questions from the superintendent or members of the board?
No, just to emphasize what Mr. Francis said, because I think we probably cannot say that enough, as we know how excited people are to get this in, and we are as well. But one of the items related to the main electrical panel has a 50-week lead time. And so we appreciate you allowing us to pull this up by even a week to get these things ordered. But while we'll have the units in place and everything ready to roll until we get that main electrical panel, we will not be able to run the air conditioning off of our current system. So that information is something we will continue to communicate out to those schools, to those school communities, but I think it's important that we reiterate that each time we talk about this.
All right. Any other comments or questions from members of the board? Seeing none, we have a motion for approval of summer 2022 bond renovation bid package 2021 bond. And that motion was by Mr. Johnson, supported by Mrs. Bonnefield. Mrs. Bonnefield, would you please take the roll on that item?
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mrs. Bonnefield says yes. Mrs. Acosta?
Yes.
Mr. Centers?
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis?
Yes.
And President Burton?
Yes.
Oh,
Oh, I'm sorry, abstain. I'm in the habit of voting.
sorry.
That's okay.
It was-
I am abstaining from the vote on that item.
Okay, are we okay with that? Okay.
We are, if you
No,
want.
no, I mean not your abstention, but because I called it out. Do we need to revote or? we're
Let's
good?
go ahead and revote just to make certain that we are totally clear.
I'm sorry.
That's
That
all
was-
right.
That
I-
was my fault.
I'm in the habit of going through those things also.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mrs. Bonnefield says yes. Mrs. Acosta?
Yes.
Mr. Centers?
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis?
Yes.
And President Burton?
Abstain.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next item on our agenda is approval of LMC furniture for Randolph 2021 bond. May I have a motion, please?
President Burton,
Mrs. Jarvis.
move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District approve the purchase of furniture for Randolph Elementary's Library Media Center from NBS Commercial Interiors, Troy, Michigan, in the amount of $67,493.80.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Jarvis, supported by Mrs. Acosta. Mr. Francis.
Thank you very much. Related to something we just spoke about here was the renovations. Randolph was one of the buildings mentioned. The LMC is a big part of what is going to be renovated, and of course, we're going to be filling those LMCs with furniture. However, based upon, through our architectural firm, French Associates, and working with NBS, we were told that the manufacturer for the bookshelves are going to take a little bit longer than the other items that we'll be putting in the LMCs. Well, looking at Randolph alone, we discussed a little bit of this. I believe I briefed the board on the fact that Randolph Elementary is in the center of its building. The other 4 buildings have media centers that are on the end of the building. They can be isolated. We intend to be doing some construction work both before the end of this school year as well as potentially into the fall of the next school year. We can do that by isolating those other 4 buildings, LMCs, and keeping the construction work separate from students and staff. However, because Randolph, their LMC, if you're familiar with Randolph at all, you'll know it's smack dab in the middle of that building, and in fact, it's an open concept. So we want to pull forward all of our work and concentrate it on Randolph to ensure that it will be done in the fall. So we will not be taking over that library early with construction workers, and we will be planning to not have construction continue into the school year. So to that end, that means we would like to have that, when it's done, the furniture for it. So we decided to pull forward those bookshelves, and that specific manufacturer also provides a few other items that we plan to put into Randolph. So we decided just to keep it simple and order everything at one time from that manufacturer. So when you look at the quote that is provided in your board packet, you'll see more than just bookshelves. That's because it's all the same manufacturer. We're just going to do it all in one fell swoop since we're here.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? Mrs. Bonnefield?
Mr. Francis, just to kind of go along with the air conditioning, I'm assuming with all the supply chain and stuff that there is absolutely no guarantee that the Randolph Library will be finalized, and we need to set that expectation, but that if there is anything left over, it will be done at an appropriate time of the day with all safety measures in place to protect students if perhaps we have to move into the school year.
Yes, great question, and thanks for bringing it up. And you're correct. All of our efforts have been and will continue to be on having that done in time. But the way the world is right now, there's no guarantee. As you mentioned, we would do things on second shift. That mean in the PMs, after school, tidy up afterwards. School takes place, and the next day they come back again in the PM and work again. So we would just work through that. It's obviously, first and foremost, our goal and our concentration on getting that done. And Clark Construction knows that, and they're our construction manager. They're going to push for that, even if that means bringing workers into that space and sort of overloading it. But as you mentioned, some things just are not in our control. If that's the case, we will handle it in the most non-disruptive manner possible.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other comments or questions from the superintendent or members of the board? Seeing none, we have a motion for approval of the LMC furniture for Randolph 2021 bond. Motion by Mrs. Jarvis, supported by Mrs. Acosta. And Mrs. Bonnefield, would you please take the roll?
Mrs. Jarvis?
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta?
Yes.
Mr. Centers?
Yes.
Mr. Jensen?
Yes.
Mrs. Bonnefield says yes, and President Burton.
Yes. And that motion passes. The next item on our agenda this evening is approval of Summer 2022 Stevenson Tennis Courts Projects Sinking Fund. May I have a motion, please?
President Burton,
Mr. Centers.
move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District approve the recommendation from its owner's representative, Plant Moran Cressa, and its landscape architect and designer, Foresight Design, Inc., to approve the contractors identified and the construction project budget for the Stevenson High School Tennis Courts project in the total amount of $969,988. which includes costs for hard construction and contingency, and authorizes the superintendent or her designee to negotiate and execute final contracts on behalf of the Board of Education with the awarded contractors.
Support.
We have a motion by Mr. Centers, supported by Mrs. Jarvis. Mr. Francis?
Thank you, President Burton. This, as we've shifted a little bit from the bond to the sinking fund, as far as two different pots of money that we can use to do updates and repairs, replace, et cetera, throughout the district. This is a planned project. A few years back, we did the Churchill tennis courts. Our 10-year facility plan had on its docket to do also Stevenson tennis courts as well as the Franklin tennis courts. This year, Stevenson is up, and we are recommending Foresight Design, you're all familiar with. They've been with us through most of the athletic fields and facilities renovations. They've been with us on this. We've worked with the administration, athletic directors, and tennis coaches at Stevenson High School, and we're very excited for Nagel, who is going to be the main vendor in this job with regard to the paving, to be returning to Livonia Public Schools. They're relatively local, meaning that they're headquartered in Novi, but they have their plant here in Livonia. So we do recommend to you this planned project to replace the Stevenson High School tennis courts. And with that, the fencing around it, we'll be working on some drainage underneath, which was very critical to the longevity of the new courts.
Any comments or questions from the superintendent or board members? Mr. Francis, this is the project in which we have to have some rather significant excavation done underneath the current courts because they've not been done in such a long time to get things, as you said, some drainage issues taken care of and so forth. So this project will last for a good number of years. Is that correct?
Yes, that is the plan. We have a very similar build over at Churchill that was done in the fall of 17 is when we completed those. We've had no issues over the past 4 or 5 years. It's really 4.5 at this point on those courts, and we're looking forward to similar success with this project. The design of it really honed in quite a bit on the construction end with regard to the drainage, what the base is. We've had cores drilled, and really those are just a sample of what's there. So once we peel off, once Nagel peels off that layer in those courts, they're going to inspect that sub base. We have dollars to replace. We could get some dollars back if much of what's under there is in good condition, et cetera. And then we have some different drainage solutions before the pavement goes back on top.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other comments or questions? Seeing none, we have a motion for approval of summer 2022 Stevenson Tennis Courts Project Sinking Fund. Motion by Mr. Centers and supported by Mrs. Jarvis. Mrs. Bonnefield, would you please take the roll?
Mr. Centers?
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis?
Yes.
Mrs. Bonnefield says yes. Mrs. Acosta?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
And President Burton?
Yes, and that motion passes. Thank you very much, Mr. Francis, for all of your work on all of these projects. The next item on our agenda this evening is recess to close session for superintendent evaluation. May I have a motion, please?
President Burton,
Mrs. Acosta.
move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District recess to closed session for the superintendent's evaluation.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Acosta, supported by Mrs. Bonnefield. Any questions or comments on this item? Mr. Johnson.
President Burton, after we recess, will we be coming back on camera?
We will not be coming back on camera, seeing as this is the last item of the evening.
Thank you.
And this is not an item upon which we will be voting until next week. And that vote will take place on camera during our next meeting. Next week or the week after, our next voting meeting.
Next week. Yeah.
Next week, okay.
Next week.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson, I appreciate that. Any other comments or questions? Seeing none, we have a motion for recess to close session for superintendent's evaluation. Motion by Mrs. Acosta, supported by Mrs. Bonnefield. And Mrs. Bonnefield, would you please take the roll?
Mrs. Acosta?
Yes.
Mrs. Bonnefield says yes. Mr. Centers?
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
President Burton?
Yes, and that motion passes. We are now going into closed session. As Mr. Johnson stated, we will not be coming back on camera after that, because the only thing left to do would be to adjourn at that time. So we will not see us any longer this evening. We wish you a wonderful week, and we hope to see you next week. Thank you very much. Good night.